Let me ask you something. Do you ever sit around trying to come up with a new idea? I mean, maybe you're trying to write a book or a song or create new artwork, hell, maybe even a podcast. And how hard is it for you to get the idea out, or if any, while you're sitting there focused? Most of the time, ideas do not come from sitting around at your desk, but rather when you're experiencing life and you're out soaking up the world. Say you find an idea. Well, now how do you execute it? How do you know if that idea is crap? These are just a few things standing in the way of your next project. So, I have a little bit of advice for you and for myself. Just take all these ideas and throw them at the wall. Throw them at the wall and see if they stick. Maybe pick some of them back up, examine them, and try to figure out why they didn't stick and how you can make them even more sticky for the next throw. Because what's most important is that you just keep throwing. I'm Jacob Johnson. This is the Myers Roll Podcast, episode 14, Somnath. Right after the break. This episode is brought to you by the Beautiful Bazaar Art Prize. If you are an artist, now is the time to enter the contest and showcase your work on their international platform and have a chance to win $50,000 in prize money. You have until midnight on July 17th, LA time, to enter the contest. To enter and find all the information, go to beautifulbazaarartprize.art. If you enjoy the podcast and want even more content while supporting us, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/MyeredIsReal and sign up today for only $3 a month. That's less than 1 cent a day. Thank you for your support and enjoy the episode. Say hello to Somnath Pal.
My name is Somnath Pal. I'm from Mumbai, India, and I work in the visual arts in various capacities. I work as an art director for a VFX studio based out of India. I also do my own uh, like illustrations, artworks, personal artworks. I sometimes write as well, so I'm also collaborating with a few film directors, and I'm writing screenplays for them. And if I get some time, I try to work on my short animation, which is what I love doing. But animation is super hard, so I have to uh, juggle around a bit.
As you can tell, he has quite a number of skills and interests, but it wasn't always that way. So let's go back to the beginning. Somnath's father had him at a much later age in life and was an artist himself.
I was born in Lucknow, which is in the northern part of India, to a very lower middle class sort of a family. My father was a sculptor, but he used to work with GSI, which is Geological Survey of India. It's a government body which kind of like there is archaeology, there is geology. So they used to look for fossils and they would find fossils and the paleontologists would gather them together. And then dad came into the picture where he would sculpt life-size models of dinosaurs or whatever fossils were found.
On top of being born in a lower middle class family, Somnath was also living in a more violent, crime ridden area.
If I consider my upbringing from a child, I grew up in a very patriarchal sort of a society, and there were bullies all around. I was never a bully sort of a guy. And the part that I said, Lucknow, it belongs to this region called UP. And around that time, it was infamous for a lot of, you know, dacoits and I don't know. I mean, uh, yeah, goons and all of that. In some ways, like the mafia in the West, say in New York, a lot of because a few goons, few prominent goons were coming out of that region. UP was infamous. UP and Bihar were the two states who were sort of infamous in that way, in Indian country sort of context. I love the place that I was brought up. I love the culture of Lucknow. Lucknow has a different shade to it as well. But yeah, this was also this aspect. And people are generally a little aggressive. The way they talk, the way they, it has a flavor of that. Like I have seen violence, and I have seen violence in a very, people have been they have been okay about it. You understand? It's such a scarring idea itself, you know? Uh, but I have seen that happen in my surroundings.
Growing up in this rougher environment and dealing with not having as much money growing up, did you feel that? when you were a kid, or was it not until looking back later that you kind of realized the situation?
Uh, it was definitely there. Um, so I fortunately back then, at least the place where I went to study was the education was still affordable, even for my father. But like I could see the difference. I knew that you know from from my early school days, I never had the finest stuff. When things got torn, I had to stitch them and carry on with it. I did not really have the liberty to throw my shirt away and get a new shirt. That sort of a thing. I rarely had like I had TV privileges, television privileges, but I had a small black and white 14-inch television. And that was because my father was forced to buy it. He never wanted to buy it, but he was forced to buy it because there was a very popular show in India back then called Ramayana. It's an ancient mythological sort of rendition of like a show. And I used to run to my neighbor's house to see that. And he was a little ashamed of it. So he finally got a television just because of that. And even when my education was concerned, a lot of times he was not in a position to afford it. But the good thing about my father was that he would find a substitute which was still entertaining. Like when I was in my sixth or seventh standard, people were getting into the habit of reading, like, what do you call Hardy Boys and all of those. Like all the cool guys in my school were already reading and discussing, and I used to feel a little left out. And I used to chase my mom, but those things, even for our standard, were damn expensive. Like they were, I don't know, they were like $1.50 back then, you know, uh, and even that $1.50 back then was around 50-60 bucks. It's a like there are more important needs to be taken care of. That was not on the priority list. I used to figure out, I would do stuff for people in exchange for money. I never told this to my parents because they would have never approved of it. But I was like, okay, I will draw a sketch for you, but you got to get me. And it was not always money, but it was like, you'll have to get me that, that sort of a thing. So that is how I kind of found my ways
And what was your relationship to the art while growing up?
up until like even when I was in my engineering, I used to draw, but it was more of that idea of, attracting attention. I I could never, honestly, I could never think of, like, it never crossed my mind that I could make a career out of it. Honestly, my parents weren't even aware of the fact that like there is this college in NID, which is a institute where you go for a bachelor's course in animation. Like they would have, I'm sure if they knew about it, they would have definitely sent me there. And I kind of, because I was always in that, engineering route, I have to, and I used to get good grades in school. So you kind of make friends with people who have similar interests. And I ended up making that, and all of them appeared for engineering, and all of them got into like all the premier institutes in India, like the IITs and everything.
And while his dad was an artist himself, he knew the struggle he had to deal with, and he didn't want that life of an artist for his son.
Dad never really wanted me to be an artist. Like he never discouraged me, but he saw that he struggled a lot. So I was encouraged to pursue something which is, and you have to understand, this is India of the 90s. India was allowing foreign investors to come and open plants in India, and it was booming that way. So a thriving culture for the IT industry and engineering in various capacities was something which was building up.
So he decided to go to engineering school in the hopes of having a more stable career. But turns out he didn't enjoy it at all. Once he told his family he hated his job and wanted to go back to school for art, it didn't go over so well.
I ended up becoming an engineer. I graduated in 2007 as an electrical engineer. But sadly, I didn't enjoy it much. And I upset my parents when I said that, I empathize from their point of view because they did not have the means to kind of fund another education. So when I took that decision, I had to like really like I upset a few people.
Somnath wanted something else in life, and he had already tried the safe route, and he knew he couldn't live his whole life in this job he hated. So, looking back, he had always noticed that in school and anytime they had an art project or a part of a project that involved some form of art, he was the one in charge and making it happen. Luckily, a friend noticed this side of him and suggested he go to this 2 year animation course he had heard about.
And I then took a 2-year animation program in IDC, which is based out of Bombay. The course was fun, uh, but it was challenging in the sense that many of my um, co-mates, as in mates, as in the the course that we were pursuing, they were from in some way the art background itself. Either they had done some sort of fine art. I think apart from me, just a couple of other guys were from non art backgrounds. So I struggled to kind of cope with the course. Sorry.
When applying for the course, Somnath realized he was very underprepared, but he knew this was something he wanted, and he wasn't afraid to put all the work in and throw everything he had at that wall until something stuck.
See, the thing is that all my sketches were the back pages of my notebooks. They were not artistic pieces which have been framed or compiled or kept for archiving. And this is where the engineering bit comes into. I have to get into a course. I need to understand and do my research well. So I called up people where I wanted to take up the course. When they didn't answer, I was audacious enough to call the faculty. Eventually, a faculty, and she's one of the dearest people in my lives. I thank her every day for just being patient with me and nurturing me as an artist. She was my first mentors, Shilpa Ranade. She's a brilliant filmmaker. So she called me and she asked me to get anything that I'd drawn. And she said, I don't think, if you show it like this, it won't work in the interview. I hadn't even heard of the term portfolio till then. So when she said, get your portfolio, I didn't even know what to do. So I took all those dirty sketches and I took it. And she said, no, this is how you need to present yourself. We are looking for storytellers. We want people who have a knack in storytelling. So we want to see whether you have an interest in storytelling. This was 2 or 3 months before the interview.
And so after hearing that advice, kind of what'd you do? What was your what was the ways that you got your portfolio prepared so that you could actually get into the course?
So this became my routine. I used to leave my office at 7, and by the time I would reach home, it was already 9. So this is what I did, and I'm not advocating it, but this is how desperate I got after that suggestion. I took the breaks. So when I was in the bus traveling from the office, I would write it in my notebook because in a bus you can't really sketch because the bus moves a lot and all of that. It's difficult to sketch. And I started skipping lunch because lunch was 1 hour long. So I would generally go grab something quick in like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I would grab that, and I would spend 55 minutes Google artists and things like that, and I would draw from them. This was a routine for about 2 months. So when I finally finished like the portfolio, I had one, people call it a comic book sort of a thing or a graphic novel, like a 22-page sequential art story, which was terribly made. I threw it, I burnt it. I don't know where it is. I was very embarrassed about it. But anyway, but I had that ready as a sequential art. I had 3 short stories ready. I had 10 or 12 character designs along with, like, I had understood what model sheets are. Back then, Blogspot was really famous. So I would go on Blogspot and look at all these Pixar artists, animation artists from different parts of the world, and then try and understand. So I picked up some of my terms from there. But when I finally compiled all of it together and I showed it to Shilpa ma'am, I realized that more than the quality of the artwork itself, the bigger contributing factor was that I had set everything up from scratch in those 2 months, to match the portfolios of some of the other aspirants. And that is how I kind of got into IDC and their animation program.
Boom! He threw everything he had at the wall, and something finally stuck and got into the animation course. However, even though he made it in, he felt at a disadvantage as most other students came from some sort of art background, and he always found himself banging his head against the wall trying to figure out how to complete the projects.
Like, obviously, there is some bit of glamour attached to animation, that you can make things move and all of that. But when I actually got into the course, I realized that it's far too grilling. Like, every frame had to be drawn. I went there with the perception that, I'll do some bits and the system is going to animate it for me to an extent. But the course in IDC wasn't that sort of course. They were more into the idea of traditional animation, and I love that. Animation meant understanding, the 12 principles, drawing frame by frame, and understanding movement, all of that, and drawing them each frame. So this is 2008, and I sucked at it. Like, the first year, I told you, right, that I hated myself because I couldn't do any of the line tests well, any of the uh, exercises, and my batch was full of rock stars. Like, they would, when I would look at their work, I would constantly question myself. I was like, like, I can't make a career out of it.
Once his second year came around, he was finally starting to figure things out, and they asked the students to create a short film.
You get a 4 to 5 month period to make a short film. And this was the time, and Shilpa happened to be my guide on the first film. And I constantly came up with ideas. And this was this film called The Candy Tree. I went through numerous iterations, and every time I would go to Shilpa, and I love her method of teaching because she never tell me what is right or what is wrong in the idea. She would understand, she would listen to it, and then she would give me either a book or the name of an illustrator. And it was an idea that I could explore. And that made me explore and refine the idea. And I finally came up with this idea that, there is this kid, and it was partly influenced by my childhood as a kid. I struggled for the first month coming up with the story, and then another almost a month coming up with my first animation itself. Like, the first, say, 5 seconder or 10 seconder. And because it took 1 month, and I just had another 2 or 3 months left with. And I realized at this rate, like, this film is meant to be like 6 minutes long. And at this rate, I wouldn't be able to finish the film. I was overworking. I was sleeping in the lab itself. I was desperate to kind of finish this film. Like, there were so many rock stars that I was constantly under this pressure that, my film will get lost if I don't make a good film, or a film that can stand out.
While creating a particular scene for the film, he had a moment that clicked for him. He had to act out the character running and pulling himself up onto a counter. And it was when he was acting out this motion and in real life had to pull his pants up, he realized that that was a part that needed to be added to the animation. And that's when it all finally came together and he realized the true power of animation and how that he could create these characters that could do anything you can imagine.
Like, it was possibly the first piece of animation where it was it had a certain level of believability. Like, my last maybe 1 year, 2 month struggle had finally produced something like this 10 seconder, which was worthwhile. And I burst into tears. And it was this bit which was such a fulfilling experience that I think I decided to marry myself to the idea of animation itself.
Once Somnath finished the program, he took a job working for an animation studio for Cartoon Network and would be part of various IPs for India. He never liked to put a label on himself, so he was trying out anything in the arts that he could. That's when he was asked by a friend to work on an independent live action film titled Court. This film would go on to win many awards and was received very well. Through this experience, Somnath started to view his work in animation in a different light, which would lead him down a path to create one of his most impressive and moving works to date.
So then I started getting a lot of production design offers, but I wasn't married to the idea. So it was around that time, like when I was working on Court, it was then that I realized that in animation, we don't see spaces as characters enough. Or even if we do, it's a sort of a caricature of sorts. Um like, not to demean them, obviously. It's just because animation is perceived to be a certain kind of medium which has to have a larger than life appeal, because of which they had to accentuate the character to the point where it becomes a little, how do you put it, it's larger than what it actually is. There is no subtlety. So I wanted to explore that bit. And around that time, I was also trying to figure out uh, what I would call my voices. So I had been in the company of some brilliant, brilliant illustrators. Like, I consider all of them my mentors. They all had a certain style of their own. Like, you look at their artwork and you will know that this is an Abhishek Singh through and through, or this is a Yatindra Shinde through and through. And I was dabbling with the idea of, where would I be? What would I want to do? I was getting sensitized to my cultural context. So it made me look within, where do I belong? What um, what is it that constitutes me? And in some ways, there is a bipolarity that existed even in that interpretation. One interpretation was the narrative fiction way, which is my animation way, where I was trying to create content which is culturally sensitive, where I would look at moments which are mundane and document them through animation.
During this time, Somnath's father would pass away. This moment would weigh heavy on him, and he was thrust into now having to perform these age old rituals and social traditions that the son does after the father's passing. This process didn't give Somnath time to properly absorb the moment he was living and process his grief, and it left him feeling very numb.
Like, death has been is the most dramatic event that you can imagine in narrative fiction, right? Like, whenever death happens, it's like things change dramatically, at least in most narrative fiction. So my experience was very, very mundane. Like, and especially in India, death is surrounded by so many rituals. And I'm not saying, like, in each culture, death is surrounded by a lot of rituals, because it's only in retrospect that death actually gets its meaning. You know, till the person is alive, you don't really contemplate his whole life and attach meaning to it. But the moment he passes away, it's a very natural phenomena to add meaning to his whole existence. And all these rituals are kind of, they're meant to do that. But from a first person point of view, you don't really want that, right? The only thing that you want is this moment of aloofness, or this moment to just mourn, but you don't get that. So the my whole experience was that I was totally numb throughout. Weirdly, I don't remember that ritual part at all now.
Being an artist, Somnath knew he had to turn to his medium of animation to navigate these feelings, so he created the short film Death of a Father.
When I experienced that, I was like, why isn't that being explored as an idea in animation? So in the film, there are multiple moments, and it's meant to be an experiential film. You just stay there with the film, nothing much happens. But it's just that you understand that how society is just apathetic to the idea of someone's loss. It's like that loss is your own personal, but the world moves on way faster than you would expect it. And yeah, the funny bit that I was trying to say was I don't remember the rituals. What I do remember, and it's haunting, I do remember clearly the last days of my father in the hospital and his struggle. Like me being there throughout, running from home to the hospital, staying there in the night, getting stuff back from home, doing stuff. And I have it as vivid as it was yesterday. But the rest of the part is just is has phased out.
Through internal conflicts and past experiences, Somnath no longer made work for it to be accepted by others, but work that felt honest to how he felt. And when following that path, he did find his style, and that style stuck and still was able to connect to an audience no matter how bizarre he made it. You can't sit around and force an idea onto paper. It has to come from a place of honesty. So I would advise you, the listener, and even myself, to do what Somnath did and throw as much against the wall as possible until you find what sticks and find the beauty in each of these failures because it's the journey that creates the destination.